He stepped directly into the thick smoke, wearing nothing but a cloth wrapped around his face. No weapons, no armor. Only hands that had learned how to snatch life back from the brink of death. When he carried a 215-pound rookie out as if he'd done it 100 times before, the entire room fell silent. The nameless gate guard turned out to be not as unknown as we'd thought. Sometimes, legends hide behind a mop and a single look that needs no permission. His name appeared last on the duty roster at the Coronado training grounds. No unit, no rank, just a small line, maintenance, civilian, a name no one asked about, a person no one expected. Yet he was always the first to arrive. At 4:20 a.m., when the western sea was still pitch black and the seagulls hadn't yet cried out, the man in the black hoodie silently pushed his mop bucket down the sealed gym corridor. His footsteps were as soft as the breeze, completely soundless. His movements were precise, repeated like a whispered mantra in the silence. He didn't speak, didn't greet anyone, wore no earbuds, didn't glance at his phone. Like someone who had long since lived in places where sound meant death and light meant a sentence, he bowed his head not from shame, but as though there was nothing left to lift it for himself. This gym where he worked was nothing like any other. No music, no mirrors to admire oneself, only the scent of sweat, blood, and iron, the metal that doesn't reflect your image, only your endurance. And in that space, the man moved, as if every brick beneath his feet knew exactly who he was. No one took notice. At first, anyway, to the exhausted rookies after each run, he was just the janitor. A mop, a bucket, a rag over his shoulder, too ordinary to remember. But then something began to crack within that silence. He didn't work like someone paid by the hour. Every pair of shoes in the locker row was lined up not only toe to heel, but with the laces gently tucked so they wouldn't snag an ankle when pulled on in haste. The water bottles in the fridge weren't arranged by brand but by weight, the lightest on top, the heaviest below, as if he'd learned that the smallest oversight could make someone slip when time equaled life. He didn't move, he drifted. No hurry, no noise, no footprints. Every time he lifted a barbell to return it to its rack, he used not brute force but experience. A wrist twist here. A firm hand grip there. Not the motions of a hired hand, but of someone who knows that strength must never falter. Mason was the first to notice. A veteran coach and former SEAL who'd served in Somalia and Kandahar, Mason was not easily impressed. Yet he couldn't look away as the man placed each barbell at the exact angle, the exact spacing, so that no one might trip or accidentally injure themselves. Mason had seen the trembling hands of rookies, the calloused hands of old soldiers, but never a hand that needed to prove nothing and yet compelled respect. The man didn't stand tall like a commander, nor stoop like a servant. He stood exactly like someone who had learned what happens when you're not prepared. Not a word. No need to lift his gaze. But one odd thing. Whenever he passed through, the gym's volume seemed to adjust itself. Everything quieted a notch, as if he were the silent axis around which all other movement revolved. And when he melted away toward the storeroom, everyone resumed their work as though he'd never been there. But everyone knew in the morning he'd be back, on the dot, not a second late, mop in hand. Yet in someone's eyes, he was no longer invisible. Have you ever met someone whose silence forced you to listen?
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
Walker didn't know why he'd fixed his gaze on the man so intently. Maybe it was the suspicious silence. Maybe it was the absurdly meticulous habit of arranging things. Or maybe simply because someone in this room was living so distinctly differently, even though no one spoke a word. Then one morning, in the simplest moment when everyone was groggily tying their shoelaces after a long drill, that thing Walker wasn't sure he'd seen suddenly became crystal clear. The gate guard bent down to pick up a towel that had slipped from the shelf. His back slightly hunched, hood tilted just so. The training light slanted in from behind. And in that exact instant, the skin just below his left ear flashed into view. An old gray trident tattoo, the lines bold enough to leave no doubt, yet faded enough that only a careful eye would recognize it as real. Just beneath it, a long, aged scar, curving like a dagger without a hilt. Walker froze. He wasn't a seasoned soldier, but he'd seen enough tattoos to know symbol from lie. That trident wasn't something slapped on to look cool. It was ink reserved for those who'd graduated Bud, S, Passu T, and truly gone into the water, with their lives hanging on unacknowledged radio codes. Walker told no one, but his eyes inadvertently met Davis's, an instructor who'd served in Ramadi. Davis looked at him, then at the man in the corner, aligning his gaze. Davis said nothing, but his lips pressed together. Later that afternoon, while the team strained to flip tires, Mason, who seldom paid mind to trivial matters, stood in the doorway, quietly watching the gate guard sweep away chalk dust. He said nothing, just stared for a long time. Then he nodded, slightly, as though confirming something that needed no proof. Walker couldn't bear it. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, he powered on his phone and slipped beneath the covers, like a child hiding a secret. On Reddit's closed veteran forums, he began searching sealed trident with scar, hidden insignia, scene 08 markings. Most hits were baseless rumors, composite photos, guys claiming they'd been Team 6 without evidence, but one old post made Walker's heart race. An anonymous user spoke of those who are never mentioned. Deep standoff ops from Team 8 operating in isolation, no backup, no satellite comms, no paperwork. They were chosen not for brute strength, but for knowing silence, for vanishing without a trace. And if any of them survived, you'd never know, unless you accidentally spotted a faded trident alongside a scar in exactly that spot. Walker didn't save the post. He just read it, then exhaled slowly. He didn't need confirmation. No name, no records. Just the way that man placed his hand on the mop light, but sure was enough for Walker to understand. This was not a maintenance worker. This was someone who'd stood in the red zone, who'd waited for a skyward signal that never came, who'd gone out with men who didn't return. A man who came back but chose neither a podium of honor, nor writing books, nor appearing at memorial ceremonies. He chose to mop the floor, in silence, present, and that left Walker breathless. Do you believe that sometimes the quietest people carry the greatest stories without saying a word? Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see someone joining us from around the world. The late-day sunlight slanted through the narrow, salt dust-covered windows, casting streaks across the sweat-blurred rubber floor. In that moment, the gym felt like a crucible. Heavy breathing, the clatter of weights, the scent of metal, leather, and salt spreading like the final exhalation of an overtaxed body. Walker collapsed onto the bench, head bowed, arms hanging limp. He had lost track of how long the workout had dragged on, only that his whole body trembled as though about to snap. His biceps locked in rigidity, sweat poured from his chin in fiery rivulets with each ragged breath. He reached behind him for his water bottle, and that's when he saw him. The gate guard was stooping to pick up a discarded bottle cap, a small, silent gesture like all the ones he always made. But this time his hood slipped back, and in the dying light his tattoo stood out clearly. A trident impossible to mistake, crisp yet unostentatious, as if even the light softened its voice when touching it. Just below, a long, thin scar curved along the edge of his ear, like a memory that would never close its mouth. No one but Walker noticed, but in that single second, his heart felt as though it had been gripped. The exhaustion in his muscles suddenly transformed into a hush in his mind. He no longer saw a maintenance worker, no mop or towel draped over his shoulder. Instead, he saw a living symbol, proof that sometimes the most respectable person is the one who never needs to prove anything. Walker dared not speak, but he could never look at the man the same way again, and he was not alone. Just days later, a change swept through the room like a thin, unnamed mist. No one laughed upon entering the gym. No one traded meaningless curse-filled jabs as before. The rookies began lining up their shoes properly, folding their towels more neatly. Some even wiped the sweat off the bench before leaving. No orders were given, no new rules posted. It was simply as though an ever-present gaze compelled everyone to hold themselves to account. Gradually, they began to watch the gate guard, how he arranged weight plates not by size, but by frequency of use. How he bent to mop the floor, keeping his back straight, knees slightly bent, not like an ordinary janitor, but like someone trained never to expose his back in combat. How he stood in the corner of the room, never staring directly at anyone, yet somehow knowing exactly who was slacking and who was sincere. Once, while the group pulled on the battle rope, a rookie named Clark let go a few seconds too soon. When he looked up, the gate guard's eyes were there. No reproach, no accusation. Just a look that made Clark lower his head and start the exercise over without being told. That look was neither fierce nor authoritative, but it carried something trainers sometimes forget. Responsibility born not of command, but of the self-discipline you feel when you know someone has carried it for you. Mason, who had previously never spared the guard a glance, now often paused motionless when the guard walked by. Not out of suspicion, but because he knew, yet he never spoke. No one did. For the truer and larger something is, the less it needs a name. One day, Walker caught two younger rookies waiting for water. As the gate guard passed, they automatically stepped aside, no instruction needed. Not from fear, but from respect. From that day on, everyone began rising earlier. They did not want to arrive late, did not want him to see them behind him. No one publicly acknowledged him, but all silently understood. They trained in the shadow of someone who had walked through places they never dared imagine. If a single look can transform an entire room, who is that person, really? Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink of water, then stay tuned for the rest of the surprising story. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still here. That afternoon, an unusual wind swept across the training grounds, steady, not fierce, yet insistent. The flags atop the field rippled as if warning of something unseen. Inside the gym, as always, heavy breathing thundered, battle ropes slapped the floor, and metal weights hissed softly as they slid off the bar. Walker had just finished his final pull when a dry, piercing alarm rang out, the fire alarm. It was a sound everyone was trained not to panic at, yet none could truly remain unfazed. A few instructors shouted, "Evacuate!" and the rookies filed out in columns, organized, but still chaotic. Someone swung open the east door, and a thin veil of smoke spilled down from the old ceiling tiles. The smoke wasn't dense or black, but enough to make you hold your breath. It smelled of burning wiring, that acrid, lingering hot plastic sting that scorches the throat. Walker moved with the crowd, then heard a stumble behind him. He turned. Simmons, the largest candidate in the class, was collapsing by the doorway. His injured knee must have locked up. He tried to drag himself forward but only gained inches before falling again. By then, the smoke had spread under the ceiling, casting a gray haze throughout the corridor. Two nearby instructors halted, exchanging glances and touching their radios. No one dared dash, and protocol demanded a medical team, masks, orders from command. No one wanted to make a mistake. Then Walker saw him, the gate guard. From a corner where everyone assumed no one remained, he emerged. No one called, no one ordered, but he walked forward anyway. He strode straight toward the door, wearing no protective gear. He pulled the towel draped around his neck and wrapped it over his face as though by habit, no permission asked, no questions spoken. Just a step, driven by a duty etched into his blood. He vanished into the smoke. In that moment, the gym fell into a strange hush, not because the alarm had stopped, but because every heart had momentarily frozen. Seconds later, maybe a minute, maybe 10 breaths, the guard reappeared through the haze. He did not drag Simmons, nor pull him by force. He lifted him with flawless technique, left arm hooked behind the knee, right arm around the shoulder, securing him close to his center of gravity. He stood tall, moving slowly but steadily, as if carrying part of his own body. Simmons weighed over 200 pounds, yet there was no grunt of effort, no wavering in the guard's stance. When they reached the safety mat in the hallway, he set Simmons down as gently as placing a prized artifact on an altar. No rush, no drop. His eyes glowed red from the smoke, but he did not blink. He did not look around for recognition. He simply straightened, brushed his hand against his trousers, and turned to leave. No one applauded, no one cheered, but the entire room was silent, as if it had witnessed something beyond a mere act of kindness. No one could fully explain the surge of emotion, a blend of gratitude and shame that rose within them. Walker, standing at the far end, felt his throat tighten. He didn't know why. Perhaps because he'd heard countless speeches about teamwork, but had never seen someone step forward so quietly without concern for who was watching. He bowed his head, gripped the battle rope at his feet, and let tears fall soundlessly. And amid the echoing fire alarm, that very silence, once again, filled the empty space in everyone's hearts. Have you ever witnessed an act no one speaks of but can never forget? After that training session, when the gym had fallen silent and the rookies had retreated to the barracks, Mason remained standing for a long time. He said nothing, did nothing. He simply gazed quietly toward the rear door, where the gate guard had disappeared, as always. He had seen many men pass through his military career. Some bore high ranks, others left lasting deeds. But he had never met anyone whose mere presence could change a room without uttering a single word. Today, he knew it was time to confirm what he had long suspected. No one saw Mason enter the equipment storage room. The metal door stood ajar, as if it too dared not bar his way. Inside, a single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a weak light. The scent of dried sweat and aged fabric hung heavy, like layered memories. In the center of the room, on a simple wooden shelf, sat an old ammunition box repurposed as a personal locker. No lock, no name. But when he opened it, inside were things money could not buy, items that could not be replaced, artifacts impossible to counterfeit. On top lay the U.S. flag, meticulously folded in the official funeral triangle, precise edges, crisp folds its fabric slightly faded by time. Beside it, a pair of desert boots, high ankle, worn soles clinging still to flecks of red earth, remnants of a place not found on any official map. And finally, in the corner of the box, a black patch with no border and no colored embroidery. Stenciled in subtle thread were 3 small characters: SEAL 08. No rank, no name, no date. Yet to a man like Mason, that spoke volumes beyond any service record. Mason touched nothing. He only looked, his eyes devoid of surprise or doubt, filled instead with quiet affirmation. Everything he needed to know lay before him. No words required, no proof necessary. He turned, stood tall, and closed the door so gently that the hinge made no sound. As he stepped into the corridor, the gate guard was approaching from the opposite direction, pushing his mop bucket as usual. His hood was drawn low again, shoulders slightly sloped, his gait unhurried. They paused just for a brief moment. Mason looked at him. No questions were asked. There was only a gaze, honest, composed, weighted by the experience of someone who understands the power of silence. In that instant, no answer was needed. The gate guard nodded once, just low enough to draw no attention, firm enough that those who understood would understand. No one heard the exchange. No one witnessed it. But the next day, everyone sensed that something had changed. The instructors no longer referred to him as the floor cleaner. They called him simply that man. Not with mockery, but with the deference of those who know how razor-thin the line between life and death truly island. The rookies began to step aside whenever he passed, not to salute but to yield the way, as if each of his footsteps carried an unspoken authority, and no one glanced at the mop in his hand anymore. All eyes now rested on the faded boots at his feet, the one piece of his gear that had never left him over all those days. No one spoke his name. It was unnecessary. Respect was present, not in applause, but in the hush that fell over the room whenever he appeared. Have you ever known someone who says nothing, yet whose mere presence makes you strive to be better? Since the day smoke filled the gym and a man was carried out in silence, something had quietly shifted in that training camp. Not through new slogans or disciplinary briefing. No additional rule boards were posted. But the atmosphere, how everyone stepped, exhaled, and lowered their heads, had slowed, became more composed, more certain. Complaints vanished as if they had never existed. No one grumbled about the bone-chilling cold at 5 a.m. or the dull ache in their knees. There was no more whispered whining while pulling the battle rope, no more joking chatter to mask exhaustion. The young men entered these walls as if through a doorway, only they could see an invisible threshold opened by the gaze of someone they once thought invisible. Now, whenever he entered the room, no one turned to look, yet everyone stood a little straighter. An unspoken self-adjustment that no one ordered, no one acknowledged. He was still the gate guard, still pushing the equipment cart, still wiping away every lingering sweat streak, still refilling the water dispenser before anyone could mention it. But no one dared ignore his eyes anymore. Those eyes neither probed nor judged. They paused just long enough to make others reflect on themselves. That afternoon, Walker stood in the corner, quietly watching him through the dusty full-length mirror. The guard stood alone before the pane, hood lightly tilted. Walker tugged the hood down. The face emerged, not of a man seeking pity, nor of someone craving a pat on the back. It was the gaze of a man who once carried another's name over his heart and had never forgotten it. No one else was around, yet Walker stood taller. The way a person looks at himself when there is nothing left to conceal, no one left to blame, nothing left to prove, only the truth. Walker swallowed. Somehow, that moment made him feel so small. He realized that what makes someone truly emblematic isn't a badge, but the way they exist when no one is watching. That night, the barracks lights went out earlier than usual, lights off at 21 o'clock. The offshore breeze carried the scent of salt through the window crack. Walker sat on the lower bunk, listening to the steady breathing of the rookies fast asleep. Yet he lay awake, as though that image, the man standing silent before the mirror, still lingered behind his eyes. He turned to the bunk next to him, where a fresh-faced recruit was fumbling with his wrist wrap. The kid was green, always eager to show off, always asking unnecessary questions. Walker leaned close and whispered just loud enough to hear, "If you see him watching you tomorrow, don't try to impress. Don't do anything but your best." The recruit looked at him, brow furrowed. He didn't understand, but he didn't ask. Walker knew he would, as everyone else who'd ever passed through that room did. Because the real lessons don't need to be written on boards, don't need shouting or fanfare. They need only to be lived, repeated day after day through the simple act of wiping sweat from the bench with no one ever naming you. One day, that same recruit will bow his head to yield the way for another, and someone will watch him, then bow in turn. And so the silence will spread, for no reason other than the presence of a man who never told his own story but taught others to write theirs. Do you recall someone who made you want to become your best self, simply by the way they lived? Not everyone needs to be known to make an impact. There are those who enter our lives without a sound, without a name, without a title, yet leave an indelible mark. They don't speak of what they've done, they simply live, and the way they live teaches others what is right. That gate guard didn't change the world with words. He did it through consistency, discipline, and loyalty qualities that cannot be seen but are always present. If you've ever met someone like him, a person who quietly upholds values, not for themselves, but for the next generation, please share their story in the comments. And if today's story has touched you in some way, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so we can honor the silent individuals who have and continue to safeguard America with their quiet dedication. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes a hero doesn't wear a badge, but carries character.